you look at how much waste is produced in the textile and garment industry these days, it's shocking. I think the quantity now is like $5 billion worth of waste sitting in overstock warehouses in America alone.
Welcome to the Build, Tell, Sell podcast, where we have behind-the-scenes conversations about the art of brand building, marketing, and sales strategies with creative industry insiders. I'm your host, Pel, of PELNYC. Tara St. James is a phenomenal designer that is pushing the industry to sustainability. This is a great interview that gives a peek into the much-needed future of fashion. Tara, thank you very much for taking the interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Pal. It's good to talk to you.
You too. So what's your current position and where are you at?
So I have two current positions. One is founder of a fashion brand called Study New York, which I launched 10 plus years ago. It's based in New York City. It's primarily women's wear made here in the garment district with sustainable materials. And I recently launched Resource Library. So I'm the founder and is director of a consultancy that focuses on material sourcing and sustainable production in the fashion supply chain. So I work with other brands to help them be more responsible.
Dope. Very much needed. So how did you wind up getting into wanting to do this resource library and into sustainability in general?
Yeah. Can I go back like 10 years, maybe 15 years?
You can, but then you got to give us the hyper fast.
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to give you the 15-year flashback and then hyper fast to today.
Gotcha.
So it was on one of those sourcing trips to Hong Kong that you know well.
Yeah.
And I was working for a company called Covet that I think still exists. And I was doing production and design and sometimes sales, which was a terrible idea. And I used to go to Hong Kong 4 or 5 times a year to source fabrics, to work with the factories.
Yeah.
We were doing almost all of our production either in Hong Kong or in India. And I loved it. You know, I was like in my 20s. I love traveling. I love being in a hotel for 2 or 3 weeks. Now that idea is horrible. But anyway, one day I found this organic cotton and I started doing research on what the difference between organic cotton and conventional cotton was. And there was a little bit of information on the internet, nothing near to what there is today. But then I had this like, oh shit moment. Can I say oh shit?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had this like, oh shit moment of what have I been doing to the environment as a designer with my entire life and not realizing it, right? So I started looking into the impacts of all the materials and whatever information I could gather, I tried to gather and slowly started converting the materials that I was using for Covet to more sustainable, environmentally friendly materials, which were very limited 15 years ago. Organic cotton, linen, hemp, tencel, few things that I still use today, but then other things that I wouldn't use. Anyway, fast forward to now, I started the brand because I really wanted to explore sustainability in more of its facets. So like local production was really important. Supporting the garment district here in New York City was really important to me. And working with factories that I could go and visit, you know, with a subway ride, not an airplane ride.
Mm-hmm.
That I could call up and solve problems with them immediately. And that was really important. Also their minimums, I'll be totally honest, were much smaller. So I didn't want to make 500 of a piece or 5,000. I wanted to make maybe 50, test it out in the market, see how it worked, and then make more, you know, improve on it, keep adding to it, keep perfecting it. So that was really important. But the company I was working for wasn't interested in it. So I left and started Study in 2009. And I was focused on like reducing waste in the industry because the industry produces a ton of fabric waste and garment waste, using environmentally friendly materials and using transparent labor. So local labor to me was the most easy access point. And since then, I realized that because I wanted to keep Study a really small brand, more of like a exploration, trial and error type company, I could add more value to the industry by helping others. So I started teaching at FIT, sustainability, sourcing and materials. And then I joined a fashion accelerator that Pratt was running to help them with their manufacturing and sustainability. And when we closed that, I decided I still wanted to have an impact, but to bigger brands and companies that were located in New York and elsewhere, but mostly New York. And so I started Resource Library as a sourcing tool and consultancy. Because while I think I can do a lot and be really flexible and nimble with study, and I can do pretty much whatever I want because it's my brand, I'm not going to have a huge impact on the world. But these huge brands that are producing maybe unethically all over the place, they need someone to come in and tell them there are other ways to do it.
Yeah, to educate them. Why is it important to actually have transparent labor?
Well, because there's a lot of opacity in the textile and garment supply chain. A lot of companies don't even know where their clothes are being produced because they're sending an order to some factory, and that factory is maybe
Outsourcing?
subcontracting it to another factory, and maybe part of that is going somewhere else. And it could be, it could be down the road. It could be a whole other country because they're getting it for cheaper, in Vietnam, for example. So a lot of companies don't even know where their products are coming from, at least not all facets of it. And it's really challenging to track that back, but it's doable. And now that technology is becoming more and more up to date, I guess, it's allowing for tracing of even all the way back to, the farm that the cotton was grown on. So that's really interesting. But I also think it's compelling because customers want to know. There's a growing community of consumers out there who, well, there's a lot of people who are just not shopping at all because that's the most ethical solution. And I don't disagree with them because there's enough clothes out there to clothe all of us for possibly eternity.
Yeah.
But there's also this, why does the fashion industry exist, right? It's access to creativity. It's a form of expression. It's an ability to communicate who you are and what your ideals are. And that's from consumers as well as designers. And, what else am I going to do with my life? I feel like I've been designing clothes since I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me really happy. But it's not going to make me happy doing it if I know that someone on the other end of the supply chain is getting paid pennies just because of something I designed.
Does that also help the environment by knowing where it's actually being manufactured and sourced?
No, but transparency is definitely the first step in that. So you're not going to be transparent if your supply chain is toxic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, someone might, but that'd be silly.
Yeah.
Transparency is definitely the first step. If there's a push for transparency, you're going to shed some light on what's happening and hopefully clean up that mess.
So can sustainability actually happen in the realm of fast fashion?
That's a big question. They're certainly trying. I think inherently the business model is flawed or is incompatible with sustainability because part of sustainability is durability or longevity or circularity, right? So can you make these materials circular in a way that they're fast? Maybe your customers are only going to wear them once or twice, but then you take them back and you recycle them into new products that goes back out to your customers. That really doesn't exist right now.
But there's a couple of people that are actually doing buyback, right?
There are great companies that are doing it. Irene Fisher, Patagonia, but those are high quality goods made with high quality products. So they can be recycled or they can be reused.
Yeah.
That cheap polyester that's sewn really badly is not necessarily going to be reusable if it degrades too quickly. But I mean, there's solutions. They just need to be there. My favorite interpretation of fast fashion that I ever heard anyone say at a conference was, what if it was all water soluble? So you buy a shirt to go out to the club. I don't think people are really buying fast fashion for this anymore, but back in the early 2000s they were. But you buy a shirt, you wear it out one night, and then when you get home, you put it in your sink, you pour some water on it, and it dissolves and disappears.
Oh, wow.
But in a non-toxic way.
Yeah. No, of course.
That's super interesting. Is the future of fashion that, so that we can have these very fast fixes that cost $5?
Yeah.
But then what is the supply chain of that? And that's the thing that I think transparency also helps with, is it reminds people that it's human beings who are making their clothes. I think a lot of people still believe it's robots or machines,
No.
right? But no, it's not. It's humans, and it's mostly women. And that's another reason why I thought it was really important. Like, you go to these factories and it's 80% women who are working, and in certain jobs, and um, they need to be paid a fair wage. But if everybody in the supply chain was paid a fair wage in their community, in their country, clothes would be way more expensive.
Yeah.
They're artificially priced right now. It's not the true cost of what it really costs to make something. And we're so far removed as a population from making clothes. Like, how many people have family members that make clothes for them at home anymore?
I
It's
mean,
not like it was 100 years
I mean,
ago, 60
it's
years
the
ago.
same thing with bread. Like, how
Yeah,
many people
exactly.
actually, I
Yeah,
mean, certain things become novelty, but there was a time when it was a necessity.
yeah.
Um,
And
th-
growing food in general,
I mean,
just
true
like,
indeed. When I grew up, my grand aunt in Queens, in our front yard, she was actually growing a garden. We had cucumbers, we had tomatoes, and this is like
yeah.
in Queens.
Yeah, when I was growing up, my grandfather had a garden too. We had
Yeah,
tomatoes, cucumbers, squash. I don't remember what else,
yeah.
but it was great.
So outside of sustainability,
Yeah.
just primary ingredients, what makes up a good brand to you?
Uh, well, I think first and foremost, it comes down to design. Like, I don't think you can have sustainability without good design. You could be making a product that is super transparent and ethical and is using the best materials, and cotton that's being farmed at the next town over and is really transparent. But if the design of that product is crap and nobody wants it, then what's the point? You're making
Yeah.
it, you're using resources, both human and environmental, to make something that the world doesn't need. So first and foremost, there needs to be good design, and I think I will always believe that. And then second is, I think, a reduction of waste. If you look at how much waste is produced in the textile and garment industry these days, it's shocking. I think the I liked Rice Krispies a lot too. Now that I think about it, we had that too, but we
Gotcha.
didn't have like 10 different versions of Rice Krispies. We maybe had one.
Yeah, it was like no flavor.
Oh, Raisin Bran. I really like Raisin Bran too, but that might have been a little bit like, not a little kid. I was a little bit older.
Raisin bran?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think Frosted Flakes was my favorite when I was little.
It's like, I like the cereal with no sugar. Yes, Ma, give me more of that, please.
Raisins have sugar.
As a kid, it was like, what are these?
Fine. Yeah.
um, how
But
was
I
it?
do remember, it's funny you say that, because I do remember when I was a little, we used to go to Maine to the beach for holiday. Like, sometimes my mom would take us, and when we'd go shopping, because we'd have like a kitchenette in the motel, and when we'd go shopping to the grocery stores, my brother and I would just like walk down the cereal aisle and be so overwhelmed with how much choice there was, because our cereal aisle in Montreal, which is a big city and had access to a lot of things, like, there was maybe 20 choices, and like the grocery stores we go to in Maine would be like the whole aisle would be
Oh yeah.
cereal choices, and it was just like overwhelming. You couldn't even, wouldn't even know where to start.
You
But
start at the row that's eye level because
yeah,
that's what they're marketing to the kids. All the
right,
sugary snacks that have no raisins.
right.
How is it different for you to market, sustainability
Yeah,
than it was when you were working for other brands and or even with Covet in the
yeah,
beginning? Like
yeah.
how much different is the marketing in this?
Well, with Covet, like, that was 15 years ago, and at the time, people were really liking it because, or the buyers that we had, because it was all wholesale. There was no e-commerce at the time.
Yeah.
They they really liked it because it allowed the brand to have a story that could set it aside from other brands in the store. even if the product looks similar. Like I wouldn't say the product stood out so much from other products, but it had this other added story uh, of environmentally friendly fabrics. At the time, they called it eco fashion, I think, which was terrible. Sustainability has not had a good marketing department in the fashion industry, and I think that's why it's taken so long to be onboarded. It definitely needs a better PR firm. But yeah, it's gone through like eco fashion, green fashion, sustainable fashion, ethical fashion. It's had like all these. I just wish we could get rid of all of those adjectives and call it fashion, and then have to burden all these other brands that aren't doing things well as unethical, because like let them live with the
Oh
burden
yeah.
of, of a
Let-
title.
yeah, you definitely let them have the shame, and I mean
Yeah,
that probably would push them more towards doing so.
yeah,
Um,
you hope.
I
'Cause
mean,
like I said, the design is what comes first, and it has to be fashionable. But what is the concept of fashion to begin with now? Seasons are changing so fast. So anyway, to go back to your marketing question, it has definitely evolved over time. It for the longest time, I think a lot of buyers were thinking it was a trend, and they were just jumping on the trend. But 15 years later, it's not a trend. It's here to stay, and that's
oh
because we know more about the supply chain and more about how to fix it, even though that's not really happening yet.
no, I mean I remember just recently. I mean, I went to the Kingpin show looking at denim,
Yeah,
and I was surprised by how many mills were touting the idea of organic.
yeah,
And it's like they had an organic section,
yeah,
right?
and that's too bad because that's growing. Like the mill would have these little, and like the swatch cards are green or brown or something, right? Like they're separate from the
Yeah,
other. Yeah, but
yeah.
I think the more designers go into those booths and ask the mills for recycled or organic or sustainable options, the more they're going to realize that there's a market for it. 'Cause-
Oh,
Yeah,
I totally agree.
yeah.
Um,
And denim, I mean, denim being one of the most toxic
un,
parts of the
un,
fashion industry,
unfortunately, yeah,
unfortunately, but also is really compelling because there's so much room for growth and change. Like if you look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has launched a circular denim campaign. So now they're looking at brands who can take back the jeans, recycle them into new jeans, and a bunch of huge brands are signing on to this, Gap being one of them. And now the story that they tell is when they go to these trade shows or when they go to work with their mills, because they're not really at trade shows, but when they walk into the mills, instead of looking at the fabric and saying how much does this cost, how what's the minimum order, now the story that they're asking is how is this different, how is it made, what's the story I can tell to my customers, and what's the impact of this product versus this other one. Because for two reasons: one, because they know that they can tell that story to their customers, but two, because they need to be able to report these impacts to their board of directors or to whoever, and it's important to them. And technology has changed so much that the quality of the denim is just as good as what used to be conventional and toxic, right?
well, big question,
Yeah.
and probably maybe one of, if not the elephant in the room with sustainability. What is how much does it cost?
It really depends. In some cases, it can be cheaper.
Oh, okay.
There's materials out there. It depends. Are we talking about the materials? Are we talking about
I'm
labor?
talking about I'm talking about to the end consumer, like
Yeah.
how much does it actually drive up costs to
So,
the actual item?
all right,
Usually,
let's say you have a cotton shirt, t-shirt, and you're gonna make that in a really conventional way, um, in mass quantities somewhere in Asia, using unknown source fabric that's really cheap.
yeah,
That cotton t-shirt is going to be really cheap, right? You're going to get like what, a six pack for $20. I don't know what the cost of
yeah.
that is, but you can make incremental changes to that product and the price is definitely going to go up. So if you start sourcing an organic cotton that is certified by a certifying body, so like auditors go in, the difference between the two cottons is likely going to be about 20%, apples to apples. So, but then if you start factoring in like fair labor and cost of living wages for the people who are cutting and sewing and processing the cotton, it's going to go up a lot. And that's what I was talking about before, of like the true cost of products. But it depends on which change you want to make.
So basically, it may not actually cost that much more, if anything.
In some cases, yeah. In some cases, no. Like that cheap product is going to cost a lot more if you're going to make it truly sustainable. But if you're taking, like, if you're looking at luxury brands who are already using really expensive materials,
Oh yeah, they could pad it into the cost.
totally, and it likely won't change the cost at all.
Yeah.
And then there's some things like reducing waste. You know, if you like look at your patterns and reduce the way that the layout is done so you can limit your fabric waste so
Yeah.
there's less going to landfill, that's also probably going to save you some money.
Oh, so it's basically all through the steps of
Yeah.
making this garment from start to finish,
Yeah, there's
and
other
and
things
the
you can do.
and the life afterwards as well.
And the life afterwards, which a lot of brands are starting to jump on, of like take back program. But you know what's good about that is it's giving you this constant contact with your customers that you might
Yes.
not have had before, because you're bringing them back into the stores or they're sending their product back, getting a discount on the next purchase. So you're maintaining that customer and you're having the conversation with them of like, actually, this is where my clothes are going. I don't have to send them to landfill.
But I also think like there's so much data that you actually can get in that transaction with your customer, like having this other touch point with them. And I don't
Yeah.
think a lot of brands really understand that, as far as, from sales to marketing, to actually ask them like, what made you purchase this? You know,
Yeah. But a lot
there's
of brands, I mean, a lot of big brands have the capacity to do that, and they're just not asking that questions. A lot of smaller startups just don't have the manpower to be able
yeah.
to do that. But I think technology is jumping in and solving that problem for us.
Yeah, but I mean, it's great when somebody walks in with a piece and is looking to make this exchange. Like you can get, I- I'm very data driven, so I'm like I'm trying to extract every little morsel and whatever I can get. Um, so you did, because you said this earlier. So you did sales when you
So,
was doing Covet.
and study too. And
So
I'm the worst salesperson in the history of the fashion industry.
So what is the what is one of the biggest things that you learned in going into, going into those shoes as your own sales rep?
Well, okay, so here's what I did wrong, and this might answer the question. Is my focus was always on how the product was made, what was special about it, what inspired it. And sometimes buyers want to know that story, but I had the tendency of just blurting out way too much information of like
Oh,
my trip to the factory and here's where the fabric is coming from and here's how much I'd never get into carbon emissions because that was like too early on. We weren't really collecting that data at the time, but way too much information that most people, like, I'd see their eyes glaze over and they'd really just want to know like how much does it cost and what's the pre-pack size, which
and are
sounds
you?
like a really old concept to me
Yeah,
now. That idea of pre-pack, that
yeah.
sounds makes me sound really old.
I mean, some people wish they could go back to that. Tell you the truth.
Really?
I mean, yeah, because if you do a pre-pack, you're guaranteed a sale of this particular size run, and it also makes your ability to package the stuff way easier.
Oh yeah, and there's efficiencies there, but then it
Yeah.
also, that's what's contributing to waste
Oh
because
yeah, because now you stuck with these smalls in your
yeah,
store,
yeah.
and nobody's buying them. You're like, why didn't they just make this open stock? Because I know my customer, and I
And
only
no
want
one
largest.
pack is going to suit every market.
No, never.
Even in just America, there's like the range of sizes and SKUs in this country alone, which is huge, is you're never going to get one pre-pack that's going to
Yeah,
satisfy.
well, in the heyday of pre-pack, we even had two different versions of the pre-pack. One
Right.
that scaled,
Yeah.
towards a smaller spectrum, and then one that was
Yeah.
large. So to
You
to
need to put like a little like a subtext or byline on the bottom of this to explain to people what pre-packs are, because
I
I don't
mean,
think most people.
explain. I mean, you're right. You're the byline. Explain what a pre-pack is.
No, I mean, I think you explained it as just packing multiple sizes into one package and selling it as a grouping. So you'd have like 2 size smalls, 3 size mediums, 2 size large, and 1 size extra large. And stores had to buy it
Yeah,
in that configuration, and you
yeah.
couldn't bust open the pre-pack
No,
no
at
matter
all.
what.
No. I
No.
mean,
And the
some.
factories would ship it that way. So they'd package
Yes.
it in these like single
Yes.
plastic bags
Yeah.
and ship it that way.
But like some people are just they're just telling you, hey, if you want to buy this particular item, you have to buy 6 of them, but you
Yeah.
can buy whatever, size run that you want, but you have to get 6.
But that's so confusing for the distribution centers too.
I mean, it is, but I mean, this is capitalism at its finest.
Yeah.
It's commerce over everything.
Yeah.
So,
But I think so now that that's changed with e-commerce and like direct to consumer, the ability to have that touch point with your customer is so much easier because
yes,
you're not going through all these other channels. And so marketing to an individual, while it takes a lot more time because you're not marketing through a store that has access to hundreds, if not thousands of individuals, you at least have their ear for a moment. And when they get the package in the mail, that's an opportunity to really communicate what you're doing.
oh yes, and but I believe that if you build it, they will come. So if you make this platform where you're getting the direct consumer, whether it's your website, your Instagram, whatever is your touch point for them to actually buy, in the long run, you're able to reach so many more people than if you had that, if you had your physical store
Yeah.
or if you was actually selling wholesale to a couple of other stores.
Oh yeah, and I think in a lot of cases it's going to be more authentic. Like the one thing I have to say about the sustainable design community is it's really open source. Like I don't know if you remember back in the day when I was trained as a designer to go into the industry, the most important thing was not to tell any other designers or
Oh yeah,
friends what your supply chain looked like, what
no,
factories you were working with, what fabric
never,
mills. Never. Like that
no.
was
I didn't
tough.
even want to. You didn't even want to tell somebody that you use Pantone. It was like, oh, what does color code mean? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, it's so secretive. And I was trained that way. And like when I started working, it's not rocket science. It's just clothes. Why
Yes,
are we being so protective of this? And the sustainable design community is a complete opposite. Like if I find a good source for fabric as a designer, I want to share that source with my friends. And obviously you kind of have to do that when you're being transparent anyway, because you're showing a video of the
yeah,
mill and saying their name. But I want to share that with my friends because one, maybe I'm not going to be able to order a lot of fabric from them, but somebody else might, because it might be more in their aesthetic, and then they can support this initiative that's doing
yes,
something good.
yes.
And that's been a complete shift for me and a re-education that I think is really compelling. So that's been like a huge change, and being able to market that. But I also think that the customers who are buying sustainable fashion are the same way. Like they want to share with their friends, not like, oh, look at this shirt that I got for $4.99 and how
Yeah.
trendy it is, but more like, oh, this shirt was ethically made in a factory in Vietnam and they pay a fair wage, or like they have built a school for the children of the workers, things like that. And
Oh,
that's just a hypothesis, but there
no, no. I mean, but that's also,
people like that.
yeah. I think that's where it winds up going.
Yeah.
Right. It's about caring,
Yeah.
and caring through the actual fiber that
Yeah.
you're consuming, that you're making this garment out of, is like caring about the person who actually grew the plant and this, then the third,
Yeah.
all the way up to the person who bought it.
Yeah.
Outside of fashion, does sustainability, does that influence your personal purchases?
Oh, totally. With food in particular, I mean, I think the food industry is a little bit further ahead than fashion, even
Yeah.
though I've heard stories of a lot of waste in food, especially in the restaurant industry. um, in like home products because I think about what's, going down the sink, and like what chemicals I'm using, but also how are they affecting me and my breathing and like what I'm doing. But I think I'm mostly conscious about furniture, food, clothes. That's my biggest area of focus. And because I really think about what I'm buying and the questions I usually ask myself, because you know what, like at the end of the day, I'm far from perfect, and I'm not making these decisions in a vacuum. I have to remind myself, like I have this human instinct to want to consume for some reason, maybe because that's how I was raised, maybe because like it's the world we live in, everything's so accessible and easy. So it's not like I don't have these instincts to want to go and satisfy some like urge to consume something. Like I
Mm.
like shiny objects just like the next person.
Yeah.
So I walk by a fast fashion store and I think that what they offer is interesting and looks nice. I have to
Mhm.
stop myself from going in and buying something. It's not like I can just say, "Oh no, I don't need that." But I ask myself these questions every time I'm making a purchase. Like, do I have something that can replace this already in my closet or in my house? Can I find a way to alter something, or can I find it secondhand? And most of the
Mm.
things you can. You just have to wait a little longer.
Yeah.
It's not that like quick satisfaction. And I know not everybody has that luxury. Like people need to like feed and house their families and put clothes on their back, and that's not a simple solution either. But I do have the luxury of having friends who are making things more ethically, and I can
Yeah.
eat
Of course,
trade or
you're part
support
of the
them.
community. You're part of the community.
Yeah.
Um, so being being from Canada, and I mean, you have a different lens to Canada than I do.
Mm.
Do you see the movement of how does the movement of sustainability compare to that of the United States?
Well, that's a little bit harder to answer because I haven't been there. And well, I mean, I've been there, but I haven't really worked and lived there in 15 years. So I think it's actually in some instances, like from the government perspective, Canada is a lot further along.
Mm.
But then again, so is the entire world compared to here right now. But I'd say Europe has been at the forefront of this movement more so than anyone else. So, like, if we're looking to education or brand initiatives or government subsidies for like new innovation, all of that's in Europe.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
What are some places that people can actually like learn more about this, especially upstarts?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of that right now. And again, a lot of it's coming out of Europe. So, Common Objective is just launched like a couple years ago, and they're online platform for networking, and it's like the sustainable fashion version of LinkedIn, where you can
Oh
read
really?
articles but you also get sourcing information, and like they put out a lot of content. There's all
There a website for that?
Yeah, it's commonobjective.org, I think.
Okay.
It's Yeah, if you just look up Common Objective, I'm sure it'll come up. That's a great one. I love what they're doing. They're London based. Another one called The Sustainable Angle, also London based. There's circular fashion coming out of Berlin. So like all of these things coming out of Europe. The US, New York is starting to do some things too, like with Fashion Revolution, that is not based here but has an area here. The New Fashion Initiative. There's a lot of like content drivers, but I have to say the schools are the ones that are doing the biggest. Like the fashion schools are pushing the hardest for information. I think in part because they realize that the future of the industry is going to be sustainable, and they want to prepare the
Mm.
workforce for that. But compared to 10 years ago, the amount of students I get approaching me saying, before, they were coming to me with no sustainability knowledge and it was up to me to teach them. Now they have, more information than I do because they have more access to it. And they're
Wow.
sending me emails of like, I want to intern or work for a brand that shares the same ethos as I do.
That's great.
That's great because they didn't have that ethos before. They didn't know. And then, if you look at kids like under 12 these days, they just inherently understand the concept of like recycling and maybe composting and like reusing things. They just seem to get it.
Yeah.
And the more conversations I have with friends and like other people who have kids of that age, it just comes second nature to them. So that gives me hope for the future.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully it doesn't just stay, it doesn't become a trend.
I don't think it will.
Yeah.
I think, especially with the climate crisis, we don't have that much time left.
Yeah.
So if the world doesn't explode in the next 20 years, then
Let's hope not. Okay.
hope not, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a need now and there's an urgency. There has been an urgency for 20 or 30 years, but no one's been paying attention.
Well, let me ask you this last thing. One, this has been very informative for me already. Like as you're talking, I'm just the gears are spinning because
Yeah.
not only is it very much needed, but I mean it's a conversation that's going on already,
Yeah.
and it's an accessible conversation, and
Yeah.
I mean it's also a marketing conversation.
It is. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, but what is one jewel that you would drop for that new brand that's trying to come out and trying to figure out like what to do?
Well, it depends on where they're coming from. Like, are they coming from a fashion perspective, or is it like, I hate to say it this way, but like two guys in finance who can't find a good fitting t-shirt, so they want to start a t-shirt company?
No, not him.
Not them. Okay. Because I get a lot of that. And my question to them is, does the world really need this? Like, have you looked really hard for that t-shirt? But if you have a strong point of view and something to say about the fashion industry aesthetically, and you're putting out something that is totally different from what's already there, and I think there's a lot of that coming up now with startups and new designers. Like, I look at Pure Moss and John Coy and brands like that, and they are saying things that nobody else has been saying. And that's super compelling. But at the same time, you need to be making these clothes in a way that is thoughtful to the people who are making it. And not forget that there are people in the supply chain. One statistic that always throws me when I hear it is the average garment made touches, or 80 plus people touch that garment throughout before it gets to the customer.
Wow.
That's insane, right? When you think about
Yeah.
that. I'm like, how many of the people, as a designer, how many of those people do you actually talk to? Not that many.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No.
And I think customers don't know that either. So like that kind of information is really impactful.
80 people.
80 people, and mostly women.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nah, my touch point is probably like 4.
Yeah.
And that's before it goes, from design that I can think of, like going from the retailer to, probably definitely less than 10 that off the top of my head. Well, let me say this, where can people find you at and the material library?
Yeah. So it's all through, I guess the best access would be through Instagram. It's at Study NY, which is Study New York. And then everything links through that. And then you get to see all the interesting materials that I work with. There's some really cool things like mushroom leathers and, apple skin leathers and things like that I get to play with. Not for my brand, but for the library. That's what's fun. Like, I'm not going to use everything that I find in the brand, but I at least can show it to other people and help them use it.
Wow. Well, this has been a great conversation about sustainability. It's an eye opener. I think that you dropped a lot of jewels and resources.
Nope.
This has been great. I think it's definitely a conversation that's being had, but it needs to be more in the forefront. And and I'm very happy that you're willing to share it on this platform.
My pleasure. Thank you for giving me the voice.
Girl, stop. Thank you so much for tuning in. The show is available on video at PELNYC, IGTV, and YouTube, and audio in iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Please subscribe to the show, and if you feel so inclined, leave us a 5-star rating, and please leave a comment for your thoughts on this episode's insights and ideas. And most importantly, please enjoy life nurturing your creativity.